She found the key in his death suit pocket. 35 years of marriage, and she'd never seen it before. The barn had been locked since the day they moved in. Not discussed, not negotiated, just locked. Lynette Brooks stood at her husband's coffin holding a brass key that weighed more than his wedding ring ever did. "Don't go in there," he'd said once, just once, and she'd obeyed like a good wife obeys, like a woman who mistakes silence for respect. Jonathan Brooks died on a Tuesday, pancreatic cancer, 3 months from diagnosis to dirt. He spent those months doing two things: refusing treatment and checking that barn lock twice a day. Even when he couldn't walk, he'd drag himself to the window to make sure it stayed sealed. Here's what 35 years of questions looks like. A woman at a funeral, staring at a key instead of a corpse. They met in Atlanta. She was running from corporate spreadsheets. He was visiting a cousin. One conversation about carburetors she didn't understand, and suddenly she was moving to Nebraska for a man who fixed engines and spoke in single syllables. The house came with conditions: his family's property, his family's rules, his family's barn that she couldn't enter. She was 28 and stupid enough to think mystery meant depth. That locked doors meant treasures worth protecting. First year, what's in the barn? Old equipment, dangerous, stay out. 5th year, I could help you clean it. No need. 10th year, she stopped asking, but she never stopped watching. Late nights, he'd slip out with a flashlight, come back with sawdust in his hair. Packages arrived monthly, always carried straight to the barn, always his name only. She made excuses. Men need space, men need secrets. Men need something that's theirs alone. She had her library job, her book clubs, her carefully maintained garden. He had his job at the Sinclair station and his barn. Fair trade for a quiet life. Except quiet isn't peace. Quiet is what happens when screams get swallowed. They tried for children. God, how they tried. 7 years of temperature charts and specialized positions and hope that curdled into medical terminology. Unexplained infertility. 2 words that mean your body works, your spouse's body works, but together you create nothing. The doctors offered solutions that drained bank accounts and dignity equally. Adoption agencies offered paperwork that led nowhere. Friends offered advice that sounded like accusations wrapped in sympathy. The barn lock got shinier every year. Like he polished it. She could have broken in, could have smashed a window, could have demanded answers like wives do in movies where communication exists. Instead, she built her own walls, emotional distance to match his physical one. They became experts at living in the same house while occupying different worlds. 20 years in, he started building something. She could hear the hammering on quiet nights, saw him hauling lumber that never appeared in their house, found receipts for paint in colors they didn't own. Helping someone with a project, he'd say. She knew he was lying. He knew she knew. They both knew the other knew. Marriage became a chess game where nobody moved pieces anymore. 30 years in, his hands started shaking, back started bending, energy started fading. But those barn visits? Sacred. He'd crawl if he had to. The cancer arrived like truth nobody ordered. Suddenly, time had borders. Suddenly, conversations had deadlines. But even dying, he wouldn't give her that key. "Promise me," he whispered the night before the end. "Even after. Promise you won't." She promised, held his hand while lying to his face, watched him relax into death knowing his secret stayed safe. The funeral was small, Nebraska small, neighbors who knew not to ask questions, co-workers who'd never seen him smile, a preacher who talked about heaven like it had visiting hours. Now she stood alone with a key that burned her palm. 35 years of marriage, 35 years of locked doors, 35 years of accepting crumbs disguised as respect. The barn waited 50 feet from her kitchen window, patient as a buried secret. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she'd discover what kind of man needs 35 years to hide his truth. Tonight, she had a corpse to bury and a promise to break. Nebraska taught her silence before Jonathan did. The move from Atlanta felt like drowning in reverse. Too much air, too much space, too much nothing pressing against her skull. She'd wake at 3 a.m. expecting sirens, finding only wind discussing secrets with wheat. Their first house argument was about noise. She wanted a TV in the bedroom. He wanted to hear himself think. They compromised. She got headphones. He got his silence. Pattern established. Here's what love looks like in the Midwest. Coffee at 5:30 a.m., his hand on her shoulder when her period came again, him changing her oil without mentioning it, her ironing his funeral suit 20 years before he'd need it, not because she was morbid, because that's what wives did, prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. They developed routines like scar tissue. Monday, grocery shopping. Wednesday, church. Friday, dinner at the diner where Marge always said they looked content. Content, like a participation trophy for marriage. The baby clothes started appearing in stores around year 3. She'd touch them when he wasn't looking, soft cotton lies about futures that wouldn't exist. He'd steer her away, not cruel, just firm, like redirecting a child from a hot stove. Year 5 brought the first real test. Her sister had a baby, visited for a week with a creature that screamed and smiled and made the house feel like a crime scene where hope had been murdered. Jonathan held the baby once. His face did something she'd never seen, not pain, not joy, something between, like watching a man hold his own ghost. After they left, she found him in the barn at midnight, just the glow under the door. No sounds. She almost knocked. Almost. Instead went back to bed and pretended sleep when he returned at dawn. The fertility specialist came next. Omaha, Lincoln. Even flew to Chicago once. Each doctor more expensive than the last. Each with theories that dissolved into shoulder shrugs. Sometimes bodies just don't cooperate, became their catchphrase. $1,000 words meaning, we don't know why you're broken. She wasn't broken, he wasn't broken. Together, they were broken. Mathematics of marriage that didn't add up. Year 10, she stopped taking her temperature, stopped tracking cycles, stopped pretending sex was anything but muscle memory. He seemed relieved, started spending more time in the barn. She started reading books about women who ran away. Never bought a ticket, just read. The town noticed nothing. Small towns never do. They see what fits. Happy couple, steady jobs, church attendance. Check, check, check. Nobody asks about the nursery that doesn't exist, the Christmas cards without children, the way she flinches when someone says, when you have kids. Jonathan's kindness made it worse. A cruel man she could have left. A cold man she could have hated. But he was neither, just she, absent. Present in body, absent in whatever makes a person whole. Like living with a well-mannered ghost who remembered anniversaries but forgot how to feel. Year 15, she considered an affair. Tom Martinez at the library. Widower, kind eyes, laughed at her jokes. She imagined it sometimes. The motel, the guilt, the drama. Then she'd look at Jonathan, silent over dinner, and realize she didn't have enough emotion left to cheat. Affairs required passion. She'd settled for punctuality. The barn remained constant. His North Star, his real marriage. Whatever lived behind that lock got his attention, his time, his mystery. She got his laundry, his meals, his signature on tax forms. 20 years in, she understood. The quiet years weren't peaceful. They were what happened when two people agreed to die slowly rather than live messily. But she stayed. He stayed. The barn stayed locked, waiting. The first package arrived on a Tuesday. Brown paper, no return address. Jonathan signed for it like he'd been expecting it his whole life. What's that? Tools. What kind of tools? Silence. She watched from the kitchen window as he carried it to the barn. 40 pounds, maybe 50. He struggled but refused her help. The barn door opened just enough for him to squeeze through. She caught a glimpse of shelves. Nothing more. That night, sawing sounds. Rhythmic. Purposeful. Like a heartbeat made of metal teeth and wood flesh. The packages became monthly events, sometimes small, sometimes requiring the truck bed, always unmarked, always straight to the barn. She started keeping track in her diary. Dates, sizes, the way his face changed when they arrived, not excitement, something heavier, like a man feeding an addiction he couldn't name. Year 7 brought the paint incident. She found receipts in his jacket. Benjamin Moore, soft yellow, sky blue, colors for a nursery they'd never build. When confronted, he didn't lie, didn't explain, just looked at her with eyes that had traveled somewhere she couldn't follow. For the barn? Yes. Why those colors? They were on sale. Paint is never just paint, not those colors, not for a man who wore gray like a uniform. She started finding wood shavings in strange places, the laundry, his truck seats, once in the refrigerator, like he'd been carrying something, got distracted, left traces of his secret world in hers. Pine, oak, sometimes cedar. She learned to identify them by scent, became an expert in the evidence of creation happening behind locked doors. The sounds evolved over years. Sawing became sanding. Sanding became something softer, brush strokes maybe, fabric being cut. Sometimes she swore she heard humming, lullabies, but that was impossible. Jonathan didn't hum. Jonathan barely breathed loud enough to prove he was alive. Year 12, she followed him once, midnight, full moon, watched from behind the tool shed as he unlocked the barn. The door opened wider than usual. Light spilled out. Warm light, multiple sources, like he'd built a sunrise in there. He stood in the doorway for a full minute, just looking. His shoulders did something she'd never seen, relaxed, fully, like a man finally home. When he came back to bed 3 hours later, he smelled like sawdust and something else. Baby powder? No, that was insane. She was projecting, seeing what wasn't there because what was there made no sense. The town started asking questions she couldn't answer. Hardware store owner mentioned Jonathan's purchases, lumber for a shed they didn't build. Electrical supplies for renovations that never happened. She smiled, made excuses, pretended understanding she didn't have. He's always got a project going, became her standard lie. Year 18 brought the worst discovery, not evidence, absence of evidence. She searched his truck while he showered. Nothing. Searched his workshop in the garage. Nothing. Every trace of his barn activities stayed in the barn, like a man having an affair with perfection itself. Christmas morning, year 22, she gave him tools. He gave her earrings. They sat in silence that had grown edges. Then he said something that made her blood stop. I'm sorry. For what? For needing this. Needing what? But he was already walking to the barn, already choosing the lock over her questions. She almost followed, almost demanded entry, almost became the wife who breaks things to see inside. Instead, she cleared wrapping paper and wondered what kind of secret required 22 years of apologies. The answer waited behind that door. Patient as cancer, certain as the silence between them. She'd find out soon enough. Death has a way of picking locks that life keeps closed. But first, Jonathan had to finish whatever he was building in there, one nail at a time. The shaking started in his hands. Tuesday morning, coffee cup rattling against the saucer like Morse code spelling beginning of the end. Jonathan said nothing, set the cup down, went to work, came home, disappeared into the barn. But Lynette had already begun counting, the tremors, the stumbles, the weight falling off him like flesh had given up. 3 months of denial, then the fall, found him by the truck, noon. Sun beating down on a man whose body had decided to quit without asking permission. He tried to stand. Legs said no. She drove him to the hospital pretending this was fixable, like a flat tire, like a blown gasket, like anything but what it was. Pancreatic, stage 4, 3 to 6 months, if lucky. Treatment options, as she asked. Pain management, they answered. He refused everything. Chemo, radiation, second opinions. Osage sat in the hospital bed like a man who'd been expecting this invoice his whole life, almost relieved. Like the waiting was worse than the ending. I want to go home. Jonathan, home, now. So home, where dying men go to protect their secrets one last time. The barn visits intensified. Desperate now, racing death to finish something. She'd hear him at 3 a.m., hammering, sanding, sometimes crying, the sound of a man building his own goodbye. She offered help. He refused. She offered company. He refused. She offered anything, everything, whatever would make him let her in before it was too late. He refused that too. "What are you doing in there?" "Finishing something." "What?" "What I started." Conversations became circles. Love became watching him disappear 1 pound at a time. The doctor prescribed morphine. Jonathan flushed it, said pain kept him sharp. Needed sharp for the barn. Whatever lived in there required his full attention, even as attention became a luxury his body couldn't afford. She'd find him collapsed by the door some mornings, crawled there, slept against the wood like a dog guarding its master. She'd help him to bed. He'd wait until she left, then crawl back. The barn was his church now, his confession booth, his last stand. 2 months in, he couldn't walk, built a path of furniture from bed to back door, chairs and tables becoming crutches. She watched him drag himself across the kitchen, inch by inch, kneading the barn like lungs need air. "Let me help." "No." "Let me see." "Not yet." "When?" "When I'm done." But done and dead were racing, and dead had better legs. The hospice nurse said he had days. Jonathan heard deadline. Spent 18 straight hours in the barn. She found him unconscious at dawn, hammer still in hand. Something built, something finished, something that smelled like cedar and sounded like completion. Last coherent day. He asked for his suit, the good one. She knew why, helped him dress, propped him in bed like a man attending his own funeral. He reached into the jacket pocket, pulled out an envelope. "After," he said. "Jonathan, promise me, only after and alone the first time." She promised, held his hand while lying became the last gift she could give, watched him relax, knowing the barn would stay locked until he couldn't stop her anymore. He died holding that envelope. She had to pry it from fingers that didn't want to let go even in death. Inside, a brass key and 5 words in shaking handwriting. "I built it for us." She stood at their bedroom window. Dawn of the funeral. Barn waiting in the distance. Key heavy in her pocket. Answers finally available, but answers meant acknowledging the questions. 35 years of questions she'd swallowed like pills. The funeral happened. Words were said. Dirt was thrown. Neighbors hugged. Casseroles appeared. Life performed its rituals around death while she thought only of the barn. The key, the promise to wait. She'd waited 35 years. She could wait one more day, or not. The key turned easier than 35 years should have allowed. No rust, no resistance. Like it had been waiting. Lynette pushed the door. It opened silent, maintained, loved. The hinges didn't even whisper their secrets. Darkness first, then shapes, then understanding that hit her knees before her mind. Toys, shelves of toys arranged by age. Newborn rattles on the left. Graduation gifts that would never be given on the right. A life measured in plastic and wood and possibility. She stepped inside. Her foot hit something soft. A teddy bear. Brown, one ear chewed. Chewed by no one. Worn by touching, not teeth. By a man practicing comfort he'd never give. The smell stopped her next. Not barn smell, not old wood and rust. Lavender, baby powder, the ghost of fresh laundry. He'd been washing blankets. For no one. Light switch on the wall. She flipped it. Jesus Christ. A nursery. Full, complete, perfect, crib in the center. White, hand-carved spindles. A mobile hanging above. Wooden stars and moons he'd cut himself. They turned slowly in the breeze from the open door, playing a song made of shadows. The walls, covered in drawings, hundreds, stick figures labeled My Family. 3 people holding hands, Mommy, Daddy, child whose name changed in every picture, Sarah, Michael, Emma, David, like he couldn't decide who they'd lost. She touched one, crayon on paper. But the crayon lines were adult steady. Jonathan pretending to be the child they never had, drawing pictures from a childhood that didn't exist. A bookshelf, full. Good night, Moon, where the wild things are. First readers, chapter books, young adult novels, college prep guides. He'd bought them all, arranged by reading age, waiting for someone to grow into them. The rocking chair broke her, adult-sized, his size, worn smooth where his hands had gripped, 1,000 nights rocking nobody, singing to empty air. Beside it, a journal. She opened it. His handwriting. Dates going back 30 years. Today you would have been born. I built your crib. Today you would have taken first steps. I baby-proofed the corners. Today was your first day of school. I bought you a backpack. It's red. You loved red. Pages. Years. The father's diary to a child who existed only here. Only in this room where possibility lived separate from reality. Your mother doesn't know. How could I tell her I come here to be your father? That I need you to exist somewhere, even if it's just in wood and wishes? She found the clothes next, sized and organized, newborn to adult. He'd been shopping for 30 years, sales tags still on, styles from every decade, like the child was aging in his mind, growing up in this room while she slept 50 feet away. The report cards killed her completely. Fake ones. He'd made them, printed them, filled them out. Straight A's always. Perfect attendance. Teacher comments he'd written himself. A joy to have in class. Natural leader. Kind to others. One shelf held birthday cards, 35 of them, one for each year of their marriage, each addressed to names that shifted. Happy birthday, son. Happy birthday, princess. Never sent, never meant to be sent, just proof that love needs somewhere to go. The back wall was photos. Stock photos cut from magazines, babies, toddlers, teenagers, arranged chronologically. A stranger's children becoming their child through sheer force of arrangement. First smile, first day of school, prom, graduation, wedding. He'd built an entire life out of other people's moments. She couldn't breathe, couldn't stand, sat on the floor surrounded by 3 decades of phantom parenthood. This wasn't madness. This was love with nowhere to go. This was a man who couldn't grieve nothing, so he built something to mourn. Every night, every locked door, every silence at dinner, he'd been here, being the father he couldn't be, loving a child who couldn't exist, building a world where their failure as bodies didn't mean failure as souls. She understood now why he'd hidden it. This wasn't shame. This was too pure for sharing, too painful for witness, too beautiful for words. He'd been protecting her, and himself, and the child they'd created out of longing alone. Lynette didn't leave the barn for 3 days. She read every journal entry, touched every toy, held every piece of clothing against her chest until it carried her warmth instead of warehouse cold. She became archaeologist of a life that never was, student of a love that couldn't die because it was never born. The town noticed her absence. Marge from the diner called twice. She didn't answer. This wasn't grief anymore. This was education. She was learning who she'd married, not the silent mechanic, the secret father, the man who'd loved their ghost child more faithfully than most love the living. Day 4, she started writing back, in his journals, in the margins, conversations with a dead man about a child who never existed. You gave her brown eyes like yours. He would have been left-handed like me. You were right about the red backpack. She wasn't crazy. She was completing something. Their child deserved 2 parents, even if both arrived too late. Day 7, she made a decision. The barn wouldn't be destroyed, wouldn't be sealed, wouldn't become a shrine. It would become what Jonathan had always built it to be, a nursery, just not for their child. She called the foster agency. I have space, what she said, and time, and a room already prepared. They sent Margaret first, 7 years old, removed from her 3rd home. Trust issues, the file said, behavioral problems. Lynette stood at the barn door as the social worker's car pulled up. This is your room, she told the girl. It's been waiting for you. Margaret looked at the nursery, at the toys organized by age, at the drawings on the walls, at the crib she was too old for but might need to see anyway. Whose room was it? Yours. It just took a while to find you. Truth and lie married perfectly, like she'd learned from the master. Margaret didn't speak for 3 hours. Then, touching the mobile, can I live here? Not visit, live. Like she understood this wasn't just a room, but a promise. 30 years of practice loving someone who wasn't there. Now, someone was. They came in waves after that. Emergency placements, weekend respites, teenagers who'd aged out but needed somewhere to land. The barn grew, addition after addition. More rooms, more beds, more space for love that had been practicing on air. She kept Jonathan's original nursery intact, the heart of the house, where damaged children could see that someone had been preparing for them long before they existed. That love sometimes builds the nest before finding the bird. The journals stayed. New children read them. Understood that fathers could love what they couldn't hold, that mothers could inherit dreams and make them breathe, that families form in the space between what we wanted and what we got. 5 years later, 17 children had passed through. 4 stayed permanently. Legal adoption for 3, heart adoption for all. The barn became known in the foster system, where the difficult cases went, where the unholdable were held. She taught them Jonathan's language, love through building, hope through preparation, faith through showing up even when the chair stayed empty, especially then. One night, Margaret, 12 now, steady now, home now, asked about the man in the pictures. He was my husband. Did he know about us? He built this place for you. But he died before we came. No, he was just early. You were just late, but you both made it home. She still visits his grave, brings drawings the children make, report cards, real ones now, photos of Christmas mornings where the barn overflows with voices he'd imagined, proof that dreams can come true after the dreamer dies. The last journal entry she wrote, "They're all here now, every name you gave them, every face you imagined, every birthday you celebrated alone. They're real, they're loud, they're difficult, they're perfect. You built it, I filled it. We did it, Jonathan, we're parents." Love builds rooms for what might never come. That's not madness, that's faith. And faith, when fed long enough, becomes truth.